Rick Boone knelt beside the massive iron safe, carefully drilling holes in precise patterns that made no sense to anyone watching. The rusted metal screamed as his drill bit carved through decades of corrosion, creating openings that seemed random, but followed some invisible blueprint only he could see. His weathered hands moved with surgical precision, measuring distances with a peculiar wooden tool he'd carved himself. The Granger family had laughed until their sides hurt when he'd paid good money for what they called worthless scrap metal. Even the seller, Clyde Baxter, had tried to talk him out of the purchase, insisting the old safe was beyond repair and completely useless. But Rick had insisted, counting out silver coins with the quiet determination of a man who saw something others couldn't. Now 3 days later, strange materials kept arriving at his workshop. Copper tubing that gleamed like new pennies, glass containers of various sizes, metal gears so small they could fit in a child's palm, lengths of rubber hose that he examined with the intensity of a doctor studying a patient. Each item seemed unrelated to the others, yet Rick arranged them with the confidence of someone following a master plan. Rebecca Granger had started making excuses to ride past his property, curiosity eating at her like a persistent itch. What could anyone possibly build with a broken safe and such odd components? Her father, Virgil, dismissed Rick as a fool chasing foolish dreams. But Rebecca noticed how Rick's eyes held the steady focus of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The most puzzling part was the way Rick worked in complete silence, never explaining his purpose to anyone who asked. When neighbors inquired about his project, he'd simply nod politely and continue his mysterious modifications. The safe's door hung open like a metal mouth, revealing an interior that Rick had completely gutted and was now rebuilding with components no one could identify. Something was taking shape inside that rusted iron shell, but what it was remained as locked away as the secrets the safe had once protected. The morning Rick Boone first laid eyes on that safe, Clyde Baxter was trying to haul it away with 2 mules and a sturdy rope. The iron behemoth had been sitting behind the general store for months, a monument to someone's failed enterprise. Rust had claimed every surface, and the locking mechanism had seized solid years ago. Most folks walking by didn't even spare it a glance anymore. Rick approached slowly, running his calloused fingers along the metal surface like he was reading something written in a language only he understood. The safe stood nearly as tall as his chest and twice as wide, its weight settling deep into the earth beneath it. What caught his attention wasn't the obvious decay, but the solid construction underneath all that corrosion. "Don't waste your time studying that old thing," Clyde called out, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Been trying to move it for 3 months. Figure I'll drag it to the ravine and be done with it." Nothing but dead weight now. Rick circled the safe once more, his mind already working through possibilities that would have seemed insane to anyone else watching. He could see past the rust, past the broken lock, past what everyone else considered irreparable damage. This wasn't junk. This was potential. "How much you want for it?" Rick asked quietly. Clyde stopped wrestling with his rope and stared. "You serious? Thing's got nothing left in it but rust and disappointment. Lock's been busted for years. Can't even get the door to close proper anymore." "How much?" $10 and you haul it yourself," Clyde said, certain he was dealing with a fool, but unwilling to pass up an easy sale. Rick counted out the coins without hesitation. By evening, word had spread through town like wildfire. The new fellow, Rick Boone, had bought Clyde's worthless safe for actual money. The Granger family heard the news over dinner, and Virgil nearly choked on his coffee. $10 for that piece of scrap?" Virgil laughed, slapping the table so hard the dishes rattled. Man's either crazy or stupid, maybe both. Rebecca tried to hide her smile behind her napkin, but she couldn't stop herself from wondering what Rick had seen that everyone else had missed. Her brothers joined their father's laughter, making jokes about the fool who threw away good money on worthless iron. But as Rick arranged for the safe to be transported to his property the next morning, he moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had just made the bargain of his lifetime. The Grangers could laugh all they wanted. Soon enough, they'd understand exactly what $10 had bought him. The safe would be delivered at dawn, and then the real work would begin. Dawn brought 4 men with a wagon and enough rope to move a mountain. The safe fought them every inch of the way, its massive weight threatening to snap axles and crush toes. Rick watched from his porch, sipping coffee and occasionally calling out directions with the calm patience of someone who knew exactly where he wanted that iron beast placed. "Right there by the workshop," he said, pointing to a spot he'd carefully prepared the night before. Level ground, reinforced with stones, positioned to catch the morning light. The men struggled and cursed, but eventually managed to position the safe exactly where Rick wanted it. After they left, Rick spent an hour just walking around his purchase, viewing it from different angles like a sculptor studying raw marble. He traced the rust patterns with his finger, testing the thickness of the metal, examining every rivet and seam. What he found seemed to satisfy him completely. The real mystery began when Rick started making trips to town. Each journey brought back supplies that made no logical connection to safe repair. Lengths of copper tubing that he carried like precious cargo. Small glass jars that he wrapped in cloth and handled with extreme care. Tiny metal gears so precise they looked like watch parts. Rubber hosing that he examined for leaks with obsessive attention. Metal fittings so specific that he had to special order them from the railroad supply house. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, watched him load his wagon with growing bewilderment. "What in the world you buildin' out there?" "Rick, something useful," was all he'd say, tipping his hat politely before driving away. Rebecca Granger found excuses to ride past his property almost daily now. She'd seen him working with tools she couldn't identify, cutting and grinding and measuring with the focused intensity of a watchmaker. The sounds coming from his workshop defied explanation, not the heavy banging of blacksmith work, but careful, precise manipulation of metal and glass. Most puzzling were the modifications he was making to the safe itself. The door now stayed propped open with a wooden brace, revealing an interior that Rick had completely gutted. Where thick walls once protected valuables, he was installing something that looked like a maze of copper pipes and glass chambers. Each piece fit with mathematical precision into a design that existed only in his head. When Virgil Granger finally rode over to see what the fool was up to, Rick simply nodded pleasantly and continued his work. Virgil tried to make sense of the organized chaos spread around the safe, but every question was met with the same polite deflection. "Looks like you're building some kind of contraption," Virgil said, unable to hide his curiosity despite his earlier mockery. Rick paused in his work, wiping his hands on a clean rag. "Every good idea starts with people thinking you're crazy," he said quietly. But what Rick was building would prove to be far more than just a good idea. By the second week, Rick's project had become the town's favorite topic of conversation. Every trip to the general store brought fresh speculation about what the quiet man was building inside that old safe. The theories ranged from practical to absurd, but none came close to explaining the careful precision of his work or the strange materials he continued to acquire. Rebecca found herself riding past his property more frequently, always finding some excuse for her route. She'd noticed that Rick worked in stages, completing one section before moving to the next with methodical patience. The copper tubing now formed intricate patterns inside the safe, connected by joints so perfect they looked like professional plumbing work. But what truly puzzled her were the tiny gears he was installing throughout the system, each one precisely positioned to interact with mechanical arms that moved when he turned a central wheel. Her curiosity finally overcame her restraint when she saw Rick testing something with water. He filled one of his glass containers and poured it slowly into an opening at the top of his contraption. The gears began turning as water weight triggered the mechanical system, automatically controlling valves and directing flow through multiple pathways. Rubber hosing carried water to different sections, while the gear system regulated pressure and timing with clockwork precision. "Afternoon, Miss Granger," Rick called out, noticing her observation. His tone was friendly, but gave away nothing about his work. "Good afternoon, Rick. That's quite an elaborate project you have there." She tried to sound casual, but her eyes kept tracking the mesmerizing movement of gears and the controlled flow of water through his automated system. "Every problem has a solution," he replied, using his carved wooden tool to make minute adjustments to gear alignments. "Sometimes you just have to build it yourself." Rebecca wanted to ask what problem required such mechanical complexity, but something in his manner suggested he wasn't ready to share that information. Instead, she watched him calibrate his gear ratios with mathematical precision, each adjustment affecting multiple aspects of the system's operation. Word of Rick's mechanical testing reached Virgil Granger by evening. The old rancher's initial amusement was giving way to genuine irritation. Having a fool for a neighbor was one thing, but having a fool who drew constant attention was becoming embarrassing. Visitors to the ranch kept asking about the strange contraption being built nearby, forcing Virgil to admit he had no idea what his neighbor was up to. "Man's probably gone completely crazy," Virgil muttered to his sons over dinner, "building some kind of elaborate nonsense that serves no earthly purpose." But Rebecca remembered the focused intensity in Rick's eyes, the precision of his measurements, the sophisticated mechanical engineering of his work. This wasn't the behavior of a crazy man. This was the systematic approach of someone solving a complex problem with revolutionary innovation. The question was, what problem required such an automated, gear-driven solution? And why was Rick being so secretive about something that appeared to be mechanical genius? The confrontation came on a Wednesday morning when Virgil Granger finally lost patience with the spectacle in his backyard. He rode over with his two sons, their horses kicking up dust as they approached Rick's workshop with the unmistakable swagger of men accustomed to getting their way. Rick was making final adjustments to his gear system, calibrating the mechanical controls that regulated water pressure throughout his automated contraption. Multiple rubber hoses carried water to different sections, while tiny gears controlled timing and flow rates with clockwork precision. Each metal filter was positioned exactly where the mechanical arms could rotate them for cleaning and replacement. "Boone!" Virgil called out, his voice carrying the authority of a man who owned most of the valley. "We need to talk." Rick looked up from his work, his expression calm and attentive. "Morning, Virgil. What can I do for you? You can explain what the hell you're building over here. Got folks coming by my ranch daily, asking questions I can't answer, making me look like I don't know what's happening on my own land." "It's not your land," Rick said quietly, but without challenge in his voice. "I bought this property fair and square." Virgil's eldest son, Marcus, stepped forward with barely controlled aggression. "Don't matter who owns the dirt. What matters is you're making us all look like fools with this crazy contraption of yours." Rick continued his work, using his carved wooden calibration tool to adjust gear ratios with mathematical precision. Nothing crazy about solving a problem that needs solving. "What problem?" Rebecca's voice cut through the tension as she arrived on horseback, having seen the confrontation developing from a distance. "What exactly are you trying to solve, Rick?" For the first time since beginning his project, Rick paused his work completely. He looked at his automated system, gears ready to turn, pressure chambers positioned for optimal function, then back at the group of Grangers watching him with expressions ranging from anger to curiosity. "Clean water," he said simply. "On demand. Automatically." The words hung in the air like a challenge nobody understood. Virgil laughed harshly. "Water? Son, we got a whole river running through this valley. What do we need your contraption for?" Rick walked to the wooden barrel he kept beside his workshop and dipped a tin cup into the murky brown liquid inside. "Drink this," he said, offering the cup to Virgil. "Hell no. That water's been sitting in that barrel for weeks." "Exactly." Rick poured the stagnant water into his system's intake. Immediately, gears began turning. Pressure built automatically, and rubber hoses directed flow through multiple chambers. Sand, charcoal, and stone filters worked in sequence while mechanical arms adjusted pressure and timing. What emerged from the output spout was completely clear, flowing at precisely controlled rates as fresh as mountain spring water. But the real demonstration was yet to come. Rick turned a central wheel, and the entire system reconfigured itself, gears shifting to clean and replace filters automatically while maintaining continuous operation. The silence stretched long enough for everyone present to understand they'd been witnessing something far more revolutionary than a simple water filter. The silence that followed Rick's demonstration stretched like a taut rope ready to snap. Marcus Granger stepped closer to the contraption, his eyes tracking the smooth operation of gears and the crystal-clear water flowing from the output spout. The mechanical precision was undeniable, but what bothered him more than the ingenuity was the implications of what he was witnessing. "This changes nothing," Virgil said finally, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. "Still just a fancy way to clean water. We got wells in the river for that." But Rebecca could see the worry creeping into her father's expression. Clean water on demand was valuable enough, but an automated system that required no constant human operation was something else entirely. This wasn't just innovation. This was the kind of advancement that could shift power and influence throughout the entire valley. Rick turned another wheel on his system, and the gears adjusted to a different configuration. Now the water flowed faster, with higher pressure, while the filters continued their automatic cleaning cycle. "Wells run dry," he said quietly. "Rivers run muddy. This works regardless of weather or season." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. During the dry months, the Granger Ranch often struggled with water quality. Their cattle sometimes refused to drink from the murky creek, and the family had lost livestock to waterborne illness more than once. An automated system that guaranteed clean water would be worth more than gold to any rancher facing those challenges. How much water can it process? Rebecca asked, her practical mind already calculating possibilities. Depends on the pressure and configuration, Rick replied, demonstrating by adjusting gear ratios to increase flow rates. Right now, enough for a large household. But the design scales up, build it bigger, and it handles more volume. Virgil's face darkened as he grasped the full significance. This wasn't just about one man's clever invention. This was about someone having reliable access to the most critical resource in a region where water often meant the difference between prosperity and failure. If Rick could provide that resource consistently, automatically, and in large quantities, he could challenge the established order that had kept the Grangers in power for decades. You planning to sell these contraptions? Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice casual while his mind raced through the competitive implications. Rick met his gaze steadily, planning to use this one first, see how it performs over time, make improvements where needed. The mechanical operation continued flawlessly, gears turning with clockwork precision, water flowing clear and steady. Every second of smooth performance strengthened Rick's position and weakened the Grangers' assumption that they could dismiss him as a harmless fool. Rebecca watched her father and brother exchange meaningful looks, the kind of silent communication that happened between men who were used to controlling their environment through wealth and influence. She recognized the expression. They were calculating whether Rick Boone represented an opportunity they could exploit or a threat they needed to eliminate. What worried her most was that she wasn't sure which conclusion they would reach. Word of Rick's demonstration spread through town faster than wildfire in dry grass. By evening, 3 more families had ridden out to see the contraption for themselves. Rick welcomed each visitor with the same quiet courtesy, explaining nothing beyond what they could observe with their own eyes. The mechanical system performed flawlessly for every audience. Dirty water went in, clean water came out, and the gears continued their precise operation without pause or failure. Each demonstration strengthened Rick's reputation, while simultaneously undermining the Grangers' position as the valley's most influential family. Mrs. Patterson arrived with her husband just before sunset, drawn by stories she'd heard from earlier visitors. She watched Rick pour creek water thick with mud into his system and collect crystal-clear drinking water from the output spout. The automatic operation impressed her, but what truly captured her attention was the consistent quality of the results. "How long does it take to build one of these?" she asked, her practical mind already considering the possibilities for her boarding house business. "Depends on the size and complexity needed," Rick replied, adjusting pressure settings to accommodate different flow requirements. This one took 3 weeks, working mostly evenings and weekends. Her husband studied the gear mechanisms with the focused attention of someone who understood machinery. What happens when something breaks down? These gears look precise enough that any damage could stop the whole system. Rick demonstrated by deliberately disengaging one gear section, showing how the system automatically rerouted water flow through backup pathways while maintaining operation. Built redundancy into the design, he explained, re-engaging the gears with a simple lever adjustment. Multiple pathways ensure continuous function even during maintenance. The crowd of observers grew larger as more neighbors arrived to witness what everyone was calling the most significant innovation their community had seen in decades. Rick answered questions patiently, but Rebecca noticed he revealed only operational details, never discussing the engineering principles that made his system possible. Virgil Granger watched the growing crowd from his porch, his expression darkening with each new arrival. The social dynamics of the entire valley were shifting before his eyes, and the center of attention was no longer his ranch, but the property of a man he'd dismissed as a fool just hours earlier. "We need to do something about this," Marcus said, joining his father on the porch. "People are starting to look at Boone like he's some kind of genius inventor." "Maybe he is," Rebecca said, stepping out to join them. "Maybe we were wrong to laugh at him." Virgil's jaw tightened. Wrong or right doesn't matter now. What matters is that every family in this valley is going to want one of those contraptions, and they'll pay whatever Boone asks for it. The implications were clear to all 3 of them. Water was the foundation of every successful ranch, farm, and business in their region. Anyone who could provide reliable, clean water automatically would hold tremendous economic power. The established hierarchy that had kept the Grangers at the top of valley society was about to face its first serious challenge in 20 years. As darkness fell and the last visitors departed Rick's property, The Granger family faced a reality they'd never expected to confront. Their neighbor wasn't just clever, he was revolutionary. And revolution, even technological revolution, had a way of changing everything about the world. People thought they knew. The confrontation came at dawn 3 days later, when Virgil Granger arrived at Rick's property, with a leather satchel full of money, and the confidence of a man accustomed to buying solutions to his problems. Rick was performing routine maintenance on his water system, cleaning filters and adjusting gear ratios for optimal performance. "Morning, Boone," Virgil called out, dismounting from his horse with deliberate ceremony. "Got a business proposition for you." Rick looked up from his work, wiping his hands on a clean cloth. "I'm listening." Virgil opened the satchel, revealing more cash than most people in the valley saw in a year. $500 for your contraption and the plans to build another one. Cash money, right here, right now. The offer hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. $500 represented serious wealth, enough to buy prime ranch land or start a major business venture. For a man who'd spent $10 on a rusted safe, it was a fortune beyond imagining. "That's generous," Rick said quietly, his expression revealing nothing about his thoughts. "Damn right it's generous. More money than you'll see again in 10 lifetimes. Virgil's voice carried the authority of someone who expected immediate acceptance. "All you got to do is pack up your gear and move on. Find yourself a nice spread somewhere else and live comfortable." Rick walked slowly around his contraption, checking connections and observing the steady flow of clean water from the output spout. The mechanical operation continued flawlessly, gears turning with precise timing, pressure maintaining optimal levels without human intervention. "What happens to the families who want their own systems?" Rick asked. "That's not your concern anymore. I'll handle distribution and pricing. Make sure everyone gets what they need at fair rates." Rebecca appeared on horseback, drawn by the early morning conversation. She'd been expecting this confrontation since witnessing her father's growing anxiety over Rick's growing influence. The sight of the money satchel confirmed her worst fears about her family's intentions. "And if I say no?" Rick asked, continuing his maintenance routine as if the conversation were about weather, rather than life-changing sums of money. Virgil's friendly demeanor hardened noticeably. "Then you'll find that being a neighbor in this valley can become mighty uncomfortable for someone who doesn't know how to cooperate." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. The Grangers controlled enough land, water rights, and business relationships to make life difficult for anyone who crossed them. Most people facing that kind of pressure would take the money and disappear. Rick finished his adjustments and stood back to observe his system's operation. Clear water flowed steadily while gears maintained perfect timing and pressure remained constant. Everything functioned exactly as designed, requiring no external power source and minimal human oversight. "I appreciate the offer," Rick said finally, "but I think I'll keep working on improvements instead." The rejection hit Virgil like a physical blow. Nobody had refused his money or defied his influence in more years than he could remember. The implications were staggering. If Rick couldn't be bought or intimidated, then traditional methods of control were useless. What happened next would determine whether innovation could triumph over established power, or whether some forces were simply too entrenched to challenge. The sound of approaching riders interrupted the tense standoff between Rick and Virgil. Mrs. Patterson arrived at full gallop, her face flushed with panic, and her horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. Behind her came 3 more townspeople, all bearing the same expression of desperate urgency. "Rick," she called out, barely taking time to dismount. "The main well's gone bad. Overnight. Something got into the water supply and it's making people sick. Doc says it's not safe to drink." Virgil's face went pale as the implications hit him. The town's main well supplied water to most of the businesses and many of the homes. Without it, the entire community faced a crisis that could last weeks or months while they dug new wells or found alternative sources. "How bad?" Rebecca asked, her earlier concerns about family power struggles suddenly seeming petty compared to a genuine emergency. "Bad enough that we've got 20 people down sick already," Mrs. Patterson replied. "Doc's treating them, but he says we need clean drinking water for the whole town, and we need it now." Rick walked to his contraption and began making adjustments to the gear ratios and pressure settings. "How many people are we talking about?" "Near 300 souls counting the outlying farms," one of the other riders answered. The group watched as Rick reconfigured his system, but the single unit clearly couldn't produce enough volume for such a large population. Virgil started to speak, probably to point out the obvious limitations, When Rick walked to what everyone had assumed was a storage shed behind his workshop, he opened the doors to reveal 3 more complete water purification systems, each larger than the original and connected by an elaborate network of pipes and pressure chambers. The mechanical complexity was staggering. Gears, wheels, and automated controls filled the entire structure in a precisely engineered arrangement that could process thousands of gallons per day. "I've been testing different configurations," Rick explained calmly, beginning the startup sequence for the expanded system. Wanted to make sure the design scaled properly before showing anyone. The Grangers stared in stunned silence as Rick activated what was essentially a water treatment facility, powered entirely by mechanical engineering and water pressure. Multiple intake pipes could draw from different sources while the automated systems cleaned, filtered, and distributed purified water through a network that Rick had apparently been planning for months. "This can supply the whole valley," Rebecca whispered, her voice filled with awe. Rick nodded as clean water began flowing from multiple output points at rates that dwarfed his demonstration unit. "Built it to handle growth. Population's been increasing, and I figured we'd need larger capacity eventually." Virgil Granger, who had never been speechless in his adult life, found himself unable to form words. The man he'd called a fool had single-handedly solved the valley's most critical infrastructure need, while he'd been focused on protecting his own influence. The leather satchel of money in his hands suddenly seemed pathetically inadequate compared to the revolutionary system humming to life before his eyes. Within hours, Rick's expanded facility was supplying clean water to every family in the valley. The crisis was over, the community was saved, and the man who'd bought a rusted safe for $10 had proven himself to be exactly what the valley needed most. Someone who built solutions instead of just protecting territory. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where determination and innovation collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.